Welcome to the first training video called What is Stigma? I'm Dr. Carrie Finley, and I'm a senior research scientist at the Center for Health and Safety Culture at Montana State University. I'm excited to be with you today. Before working at the Center for Health and Safety Culture, I managed a behavioral health clinic serving individuals with mental health and substance use disorder. During that time, I experienced firsthand the impact stigma has on addressing these issues. This first training video, What is Stigma?, is just one in a series of 6 training videos. Other videos in this series include How does stigma impact us? Where does stigma come from? How can I make a difference part 1? And how can I make a difference part 2? And where do we go from here? Each video in the series is approximately 7 to 10 minutes long. We encourage you to review and discuss all 6 videos. There's a handout that goes along with each video. We encourage you to take notes and fill out the sections of the handout. Feel free to pause the video or repeat sections as needed. Before we begin today, I would like you to think of all of the left-handed people you know. Perhaps you're left-handed yourself. I'm sure you're aware of the research that shows left-handed people are more likely to have learning and cognitive issues and may be more likely to engage in criminal acts. Of course, we know that these statements are false. They're not true. Left-handed people are no more or no less likely to engage in criminal acts. Left-handed people have no differences in their cognitive abilities. But that is not what we've always thought. As recently as 1946, leading scholars and physicians believed that left-handedness was associated with developmental and learning disabilities. And of course, these beliefs extended well back into history. Left-handed people were marked as different and actually inferior and even dangerous. This bit of history sets us up well to discuss the idea of stigma. Stigma has been defined as one of the greatest problems facing the entire mental health field. There are many negative consequences associated with stigma. Because of stigma, researchers have found that people might not get the help they need or stick with the treatments they've been prescribed. Stigma decreases quality of life. Stigma negatively impacts a person's sense of hope, their self-esteem, and their self-efficacy. Simply put, stigma has a negative effect on a wide range of health outcomes. But what if our actions could reduce the negative consequences associated with stigma? In this first video, I'm going to introduce you to the basic concept of stigma and talk about the differences between stigma and prejudice and discrimination. In future training videos, I'll discuss how stigma shows up, why it's important to understand stigma, and ultimately what we can do to address it. Individuals, families, helping professionals, prevention specialists, stakeholders, and everyone in our society has something to gain from addressing stigma. Each of us has a stake in this outcome. So let's start with the basic definition of stigma. Very simply, stigma is a strong feeling of disapproval that most people in society have about something. The Webster's New World Dictionary further defines stigma as a mark of disgrace or dishonor associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. Stigma can generate negative attitudes about people with a condition, and these negative attitudes can lead to discriminatory practices. Stigma is a social process. That is, it's something that groups of people, often in power, create towards other people. Stigma includes a collection of attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, and structures that interact at different levels of society. At the individual level, in groups, in organizations, and various public systems. Beliefs that there was something wrong with left-handed people led to many beliefs and practices and policies, many of which were harmful and dangerous to left-handed individuals. For example, children had been physically injured, punished, and physically restrained because they were left-handed. Now, some of you might be wondering about the differences between stigma and prejudice and discrimination. Conceptually, stigma and prejudice and discrimination are the same, and they share very similar social processes. But how researchers have studied stigma and prejudice and discrimination are different. Research on stigma has traditionally emphasized studying people with certain conditions like deformities, or conditions like HIV and AIDS, or mental illness, or substance use disorders. They have focused on the social processes related to social norms and the deviation from social norms. By contrast, researchers who have focused on prejudice and discrimination have tended to focus on the implications of gender, age, race, and class. They have focused on the more overarching big categories of the human condition, and these overarching categories have focused on the social processes driven by exploitation and domination. Racism is an example. Stigmas have been created about many different kinds of health conditions. Interestingly, we know that what is stigmatized in one society might not be stigmatized in another. We know that stigmas can vary depending on the social context. What is considered or labeled as disgraceful or discrediting by one group or in one community might be viewed as benign or celebrated and honored by another. What is deviant in one culture might be the norm in another. Stigma manifests in prejudicial attitudes about people with stigmatized conditions or disorders. Stigma manifests in discriminatory practices against people with certain conditions. Given these various definitions of stigma, it is clear to see that stigma is multidimensional and pervasively influences a variety of health conditions. Stigma is a deeply negative mindset and has no value to society. Research study after research study has shown the negative consequences associated with stigma. We currently live in a world where some conditions are stigmatized and others aren't, and because of this, people might not get the help they need or stick with the treatments they've been prescribed. Stigma decreases quality of life. It negatively impacts a person's sense of hope, their self-esteem, and their self-efficacy. But what if our actions could reduce the negative consequences associated with stigma? I venture to guess and to hope we would find ourselves living in a world that was more tolerant, more accepting, and more proactive. So this was expert thinking in 1946. Our thoughts have changed a lot in the past 70 years or so. Stigmas can change, but they'll only change if we take steps to make it change. Before concluding this video, please take some time to think about the reflection questions that are listed on your handout that accompanies this video. How have you come to define or understand stigma over your life? Did the definition of stigma offered in this video match how you've come to view stigma over your life? And what are some of the similarities or differences? We encourage you to take notes on the handout. Feel free to pause the video or repeat sections if needed. If you're watching this video with others, we encourage you to engage in a discussion about these reflective questions. At the end of this training video is a bibliography list, which includes a variety of different publications that have been used in creating this learning video. I encourage you to review the bibliography for additional reading opportunities. This first video in the Stigma Training video series introduced you to the basic concept of stigma by defining what stigma is. There are 6 videos in this series. Please join us for our next training video in the series called How Does Stigma Impact Us? We will talk about how stigma shows up in the different ways at the societal level, at the personal level, and in the structures that we've built. Thank you for joining me today.